welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into that fascinating spot where psychology and economics kind of bump into each other.
Yeah, it's all about how our, human quirks, our biases really shape the decisions we make.
Every single day, and often in ways that, well, traditional economics just doesn't predict.
Right. And our guide for this exploration, this deep dive, is Richard Thaler's book, Misbehaving, The Making of Behavioral Economics.
Which is a fantastic read. Really personal, super insightful look at how this whole field sort of grew up.
Exactly. So we're going to unpack some key ideas, some really surprising findings, too.
Things that challenge that old idea of the perfectly rational econ.
And really show why understanding our human side is so important.
Okay, so our mission today, what are we trying to do here?
Well, I think we want to pull out the most compelling bits from Thaler's work.
Right, give you, the listener, a clearer picture of why we choose what we choose.
From, buying groceries to huge life decisions.
And maybe reveal some of those surprising ways our own minds can lead us, maybe, a little bit astray from pure logic.
Yeah, exactly. Those mental shortcuts and biases.
So Thaler starts the book, not with theory, but with something really personal, a poignant story.
That's right. The phone call he got from Danny Kahneman.
About Amos Tversky, about him being terminally ill.
Yeah, and it seems like just an anecdote, but it sets a theme, doesn't it?
It really does. This, deep human emotional context that's always there, even under super rational stuff like academic research.
And Tversky's reaction, wanting to keep it private, focus on work, on loved ones.
Even finishing a paper with Thaler, watching basketball, right near the end.
It just highlights how human priorities, emotions, values, they often come first. Even for brilliant analytical minds, they're not just econs.
It's such a powerful opening. And then he pivots pretty quickly to this core idea, the theoretical econ versus real humans.
And he doesn't really hold back, does he?
No. He points out something kind of obvious when you think about it.
Which?
That lots of our biggest life choices, career, mortgage, who we marry, they have, pretty high failure rates.
Oof. Yeah, which suggests we're not always nailing those optimal decisions, are we?
Not quite. So why the gap? Why the difference between the theory and reality?
Well, Thaler argues it's because the standard econ model leaves out all this crucial human stuff.
Like biased beliefs. He specifically calls out overconfidence.
Right. Something totally missing from the econ's dictionary, but very much a human thing.
Oh, yeah. And that's just one. There are tons of these biases psychologists have found.
And he makes it so relatable with examples like the grocery shopping thing.
Oh, totally. Go shopping when you're starving.
And suddenly Tuesday's dinner plans involve buying enough food for an army.
Right. That Sunday hunger, it's completely irrelevant to an econ making a decision about Tuesday. But for a human,
it directly impacts what ends up in the cart. Our physical state matters.
an econ also wouldn't finish a huge meal just because they paid for it.
Yeah.
That's the sunk cost fallacy.
Exactly. The money's gone, and econ looks forward. But we humans, we dwell on that past cost.
We hate feeling like we wasted it.
Yeah. Or think about gift giving. Birthdays, anniversaries.
Oh, gosh. The awkwardness of giving cash.
It's the most efficient gift, according to an econ. But,
Try giving your spouse cash for your anniversary. See how that goes.
you might be testing the limits of their rationality.
Exactly. So Thaler argues for what he calls an enriched approach.
One that actually includes us, humans, quirks and all.
But he's careful not to just toss out the old models entirely,
That's key. He says models based on econs aren't useless. They're a starting point.
especially in simple situations maybe, or when you've got experts involved.
Right. Like professional traders might act more like econs sometimes, but those are often the exceptions, not the rule for everyday life.
And it's interesting how he got started, his own journey.
Yeah, the book kind of follows his career, blending chronology with topics.
And it started way back when he was just collecting weird things people did.
These odd behaviors that just didn't fit the standard economic models he was learning.
It really shows the importance of just looking at what people actually do. Observation.
Absolutely. Finding those anomalies, those deviations from the theory, that's how the field grew. Challenging assumptions by looking at the real world.
Okay, so let's dig into some of those core concepts. The endowment effect is a big one early on.
Huge. And the example he gives is stark, about risk of death in a medical study.
People's willingness to pay to avoid a risk versus what they demanded to accept a risk.
The difference was massive, wasn't it? People wanted way, way more money to accept even a tiny increased risk.
Then they were willing to pay to get rid of a slightly larger risk they already faced.
It tells you something fundamental.
Right.
We value stuff we have much more than stuff we could get.
Even if objectively it's the same thing.
Yeah, like Professor Rosette and his wine bottle.
Right. He owned a bottle, wouldn't sell it for, say, $100, but he also wouldn't buy an identical bottle for $100.
He was attached to his bottle. Ownership changed its value for him.
So what's driving that? What's the engine behind the endowment effect?
It comes down to loss aversion.
Ah, yes. The pain of losing is, what, about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining?
Roughly, yeah. That's the finding. And Thaler calls it, like, flabbergasting, but also maybe the single most powerful tool they have.
It makes sense, though, doesn't it? Losing $10 feels way worse than finding $10 feels good.
That asymmetry, that fear of loss, it shapes so many decisions, makes us stick with the status quo sometimes, avoid risks that might have payoff.
It explains a ton of seemingly irrational stuff, which leads nicely into mental accounting.
Right. This idea that we don't treat all money as the same. It's not all just one big pool.
Thaler actually went out and talked to households, lower middle-class families, about how they manage money.
And found they weren't thinking like economists expected. They had these mental accounts.
Like different budgets in their heads, almost like money in different jars.
Exactly. Instead of money being totally interchangeable. Fungible is the term they'd categorize it. Rent money, food money, fun money.
And this isn't rational if all money is the same, but it's how people cope.
The gasoline example illustrates it well. Gas prices drop.
So you feel like you have extra money in your mental gas budget.
Right. So maybe you splurge on premium gas or drive a bit more.
But you wouldn't necessarily take that saving and proportionally increase spending on, say, socks.
Because the saving happened in the gas account.
And this explains that classic puzzle. People having savings earning low interest while carrying high-interest credit card debt.
Makes no sense to an econ. Pay off the expensive debt with the cheap savings.
But if the savings are in the emergency fund jar or the down payment jar?
And the credit card debt is in the monthly bills or borrowing jar?
Yeah.
They feel separate. The mental walls prevent the optimal move.
Fascinating. Okay, another layer. Transaction utility.
Ha, the joy of the deal.
Right. It's not just about the item and its price. It's about how good a deal we think we got.
We compare the price we paid to a reference price, what we expected or think we should have paid.
And if we pay less, we feel good. Positive transaction utility. A bargain.
If we pay more, we feel ripped off. Negative transaction utility.
And retailers totally play on this, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. Think about stores known for everyday low prices or constant sales. They're trying to maximize that feeling of getting a bargain.
Creating that positive transaction utility makes you feel good about shopping there.
Even if the absolute price isn't always the lowest possible, that feeling of a good deal matters.
Then there's the trap of sunk costs. This one gets me all the time.
You and everyone else. It's our inability to ignore money or effort we've already spent, even when it shouldn't affect the current decision.
Thaler's example of his friend Vince playing tennis through elbow pain because he'd paid for the season pass.
That's classic. Continuing would make the elbow worse. But stopping feels like wasting the membership fee.
The money is already gone. It's sunk. Playing or not playing won't bring it back. The only relevant thing is the future pain or enjoyment.
But we can't help thinking about the past investment.
The blizzard and the basketball game tickets example, too. Driving through a storm because you paid for tickets.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. And the wine survey he did cleverly mixes sunk costs, opportunity costs, and mental accounting. It gets complicated fast.
Okay, so these individual biases are powerful. But Kahneman and Tversky took it further with prospect theory.
Right. This was their big alternative to the standard expected utility theory.
Which assumes rational econs.
Yeah.
Prospect theory tries to model how real humans actually choose.
And a key part is that value function we touched on. It's not linear.
It incorporates loss aversion, steeper slope for losses than gains.
And it's based on changes from a reference point, not absolute wealth.
Plus, it includes how we mess up probabilities.
Yeah, probability weighting. We tend to overweight tiny probabilities.
Like winning the lottery.
And underweight really high probabilities.
Which affects things like insurance decisions, too.
Exactly. And Thaler uses the Weber-Fechner law analogy from psychology.
To explain why saving, say, $10 on a $20 clock feels like a bigger deal than saving $10 on a $1,000 TV.
Right. The same absolute saving feels subjectively larger when the initial price is lower. It's relative.
It's not just about money and calculations, though. What about fairness? That seems huge, too.
Oh, definitely. Thaler shows how our sense of fairness can completely override purely economic logic.
Like raising the price of snow shovels right after a blizzard.
Economically, supply and demand might justify it, but people see it as exploitation, unfair, and they get angry.
Same with auctioning off the last Cabbage Patch doll at Christmas back in the day. Just felt wrong.
Even if people were willing to pay. And the bank example. First, Chicago trying to charge a fee to use a human teller.
Massive backlash. Even though hardly anyone would actually pay it, it just felt unfair to charge for basic service.
And you see it during emergencies or after tragedies. Price gouging for essentials or concert tickets. It violates a social norm.
Even businesses recognize this. The restaurant owner refusing to auction reservations.
Believing it's wrong to charge more than something is worth, even if the market would bear it. That's a fairness consideration trumping pure profit maximization.
This links into social preferences, then. We don't just care about ourselves.
Exactly. Experiments like the Ultimatum Game show this clearly.
Where one person proposes how to split money, and the other accepts or rejects. If they reject, nobody gets anything.
And people routinely reject offers they see as unfair, even though rejecting means getting zero. They'll pay a price to punish unfairness.
Unlike an Econ, who would accept any positive amount.
Then there's the dictator game, where one person just decides, no rejection possible. People still often give some money, showing altruism or fairness concerns.
And the public goods game, getting people to contribute to a common pool.
It shows cooperation happens, though maybe not optimally. And crucially, allowing people to punish free riders increases cooperation.
We care about fairness and reciprocity. Thaler's roadside farm stand analogy is good here.
Yeah, leaving produce out with a cash box. You expect most people to be honest, but you also know some might cheat without some minimal oversight or social pressure. A realistic view.
So these ideas started challenging core economic theories, even in financial markets, right? The efficient market hypothesis, EMH.
Absolutely. Thaler was right in the thick of it, finding these market anomalies.
Things the EMH couldn't easily explain, like value stocks or small firms historically outperforming.
And initially finding these things was almost awkward for researchers. Like they'd found an error in the matrix.
They had to be so cautious, presenting findings that contradicted the dominant theory.
The winner-loser portfolio studies were a big one, showing that stocks that had done poorly in the past tended to outperform stocks that had done well.
And often, the loser stocks were actually less risky by standard measures, completely backwards, according to EMH.
Then Bob Shiller's work showing stock prices bounce around way more wildly than the actual changes in underlying dividends would justify.
Suggesting maybe markets aren't always perfectly rational reflections of fundamental value. Maybe there's noise, sentiment.
Exactly. Which leads to puzzles like closed-end funds.
Trading at discounts to their actual asset value. Discount fluctuating. Then vanishing if they convert to an open-end fund. Why?
Investor sentiment was one explanation offered. Waves of optimism and pessimism affecting price, separate from fundamentals.
And the Palm 3Com split example he gives is just mind-boggling.
Oh yeah, a clear violation of the law of one price, where owning the parent company, 3Com, somehow implied a negative value for its profitable parts just because the market was crazy for the Palm spinoff shares.
It really highlighted the impact of, well, less than rational noise traders in the market.
Okay, let's shift back to the individual level. Self-control, or the lack thereof.
Ah, the eternal battle. Thaler talks about this conflict between our inner planner and doer.
The planner wants us to save for retirement, eat healthy, study hard, long-term goals.
The doer wants the cake now, wants to watch TV instead of exercising, wants immediate gratification.
The classic marshmallow experiment with kids perfectly illustrates this difficulty in delaying gratification. It's hard.
And Thaler and Sheffrin actually developed a formal two-self model to capture this internal conflict.
Which helps explain why we make plans, New Year's resolutions, and then struggle to stick to them. The doer often wins in the moment.
So how does the planner fight back?
Commitment devices. Strategies the planner sets up in advance to constrain the doer later. Like putting money into a retirement account you can't easily access, or Thaler's analogy of programmable SIFs for snacks, or telling friends your goals to create social pressure.
Even mental accounting, weirdly enough, can be a self-control tool.
Yeah, keeping money in that savings jar prevents the doer from easily spending it on impulse buys. The lack of fungibility helps the planner.
Related to this is time inconsistency. how our preferences change depending on timing.
Right. We might prefer, say, fruit over chocolate for next week's snack. That's the planner talking.
But when next week arrives, and the choice is right now,
suddenly that chocolate looks a lot more appealing. The doer takes over. Our preference isn't consistent over time.
the telescope analogy is good things look different far away versus up close.
And the standard economic model of exponential discounting doesn't really capture this present bias, this sudden preference shift as things get near.
Okay, so we've seen the problems, the biases, the struggles, but the end of the book gets really positive. How can we use behavioral economics?
Yeah, the helping out part. Using these insights to design better policies, better systems, to nudge people towards better choices.
Without forcing them, just
Right.
making the good choice the easy choice.
Thaler was involved in early ideas like using tax refunds for IRA contributions.
Leveraging that tendency to treat windfalls differently, maybe save them more easily.
Exactly. Or adjusting tax withholding so people get larger refunds, which they might then save. Using mental accounting to help.
And then came the really big ones.
Yeah.
Automatic enrollment and savings plans.
Huge impact. Instead of having to actively sign up, opt in. You're automatically in unless you actively opt out.
It uses inertia, our tendency to stick with the default, for good.
And save more tomorrow, where you commit now to increasing your savings rate later whenever you get a pay raise.
Overcomes present bias. It feels painless because it's in the future and you don't see your take-home pay go down.
And studies like the one in Denmark showed this works. The increased savings from automatic enrollment were mostly new savings, not just shifted from elsewhere. The automatic feature itself was key.
The power of defaults is incredible. Organ donation is another striking example.
Oh, yeah. Countries that switched from opt-in, you have to sign up to be a donor, to opt-out. You're assumed to be a donor unless you object.
Saw donation rates skyrocket, right?
Dramatically. Just changing the default harnesses inertia and maybe implies a social norm.
Though opt-out can be controversial. Thaler also mentions things like mandated choice or prompted choice.
Right. Forcing people to make an active yes-no decision when getting a driver's license, for example.
Yeah.
Still very effective.
And this stuff went mainstream. The Behavioral Insights team, the Nudge Unit in the UK.
Yeah, applying these principles across government. Tax collection was a big success story.
Changing the wording on tax reminder letters.
Using social norms, most people pay their taxes on time, or loss aversion, you will lose money if you don't pay. Significantly increase timely payments. Small wording changes, big results.
Even little things like trying to get people to insulate their attics.
Realizing maybe the barrier isn't just cost, but the hassle of cleaning out the attic first. So maybe offering help with the cleanup is a better nudge than just a rebate.
It's about understanding the real friction points.
And the key seems to be for these nudges to work well and be accepted.
They need to clearly benefit people. People need to generally agree it's a good outcome. And it has to be easy.
Yeah, those one-click policies. Effortless changes.
Like simple text message reminders for appointments or medication. Super simple, transparent, but effective.
So wrapping up our deep dive here, what are the big takeaways from Thaler and behavioral economics?
Well, first, that we humans are definitely not the perfectly rational econs of old textbooks. We systematically deviate.
And concepts like the endowment effect, loss aversion, mental accounting, sunk costs, they give us a much better, richer way to understand why we make the choices we do.
And the power of the situation, the choice architecture, the defaults, it's immense.
Yeah, a surprising fact that always sticks with me is that default change for organ donation, having a bigger impact than potentially years of posters and campaigns trying to persuade people.
Or the cab drivers, working less on busy days because they hit their daily income target faster. That narrow mental accounting overrides making more money overall.
It's just not how you'd expect a purely rational agent to behave.
So for you listening, this isn't just theory. Understanding these biases can genuinely help.
Right, making better financial choices for yourself. Recognizing when you're being nudged by marketing or policy.
Maybe even understanding why your friends, family, or colleagues make the choices they do. Have a think. Where do you fall prey to sunk costs? Do you use mental accounts?
Yeah, self-reflection here can be really illuminating.
Which leads us to maybe a final provocative thought to leave you with.
Okay.
Given how much impact these small tweaks to the environment, the nudges, the defaults can have, what does that mean for responsibility?
How much onus is on us as individuals to be aware of how we're being influenced?
And what's the right role for governments, for companies in designing these environments? How do they nudge ethically towards genuinely better outcomes without becoming manipulative?
That's a huge question. Where's the line between helpful nudge and problematic shove?
It's a really important conversation, and as Thaler shows, it's one that economics, psychology, and policy are now having much more seriously.
Yeah.
Something to definitely mull over.